not interested, he says, in what happens in other parts in Corinth. I want to know what's happening in your assembly. As a matter of fact, Paul says that the whole body is affected by what this one person is doing. Last part of verse 6, do you not know that a little leaven leavens the whole lump of dough? Don't you know that one man living in immorality in a church actually poisons the entire church? You take some leaven and you mix it in the dough, and pretty soon the bread expands, and just a little bit of it, a cup of it or whatever, expands the whole loaf. And Paul says that in the very same way, this one man's compromise and sin affects the testimony of all of you. All of you are compromised by it. You see, you can't quarantine sin. You can't cut it off. You can't say, well, here it goes and no further. I mean, it's like trying to burn incense in a dormitory room. No matter how many towels you put under the door, somehow it'll waft into the hallway, up the elevator, and soon they can smell it on the second floor. You just can't keep it neatly contained. And that's, Paul says, that's my great concern. In fact, he says in verse 9, I wrote to you my letter not to associate with immoral people. And some people evidently misunderstood it and said, well, if that's the case, we're going to have to go live on an island somewhere. He said, I did not mean with the immoral people of this world, or with covetous or swindlers or with idolaters, for then you'd have to go out of the world. You'd have to live with yourself, I guess. You know, I have a friend, bless him, who doesn't think that he should attend a restaurant where a liquor is served because he's contributing toward the liquor. Well, that's fine that he has that conviction, but I wonder what happens when he eats somewhere else. How does he know how the money that is being given is going to be used? If you have that view that you're not going to associate with idolaters and swindlers and immoral people, then you're going to go to northern Wisconsin and buy a little plot of land and a little bit of acreage and not see anybody for at least 5 years, but watch carefully the man from whom you purchase that plot of land. He might misuse that money for immoral purposes. No, Paul says that's not what I'm talking about. Of course you have to do business with these people. Verse 11. But actually I wrote to you not to associate with any so-called brother, if he should be an immoral person or covetous or an idolater or reviler or drunkard or swindler, not even to eat with such a one. For what have I to do with judging outsiders? Do you not judge those who are within the church? He said, that's your responsibility. You're pointing your fingers at them and you have not cleaned up your own act. But those who are outside, God judges. Remove the wicked man from among yourselves. You see, what Paul is saying is, I don't come here to Corinth with a morality campaign to clean the place up. Because I know, number one, it won't work. And number two, even if you got them cleaned up morally, unless they were rightly related to God, you would not be doing for them anything that would be of eternal significance and consequence. You would be imposing an outer law upon them without an inner transformation of heart, and that won't go anywhere. That will not fuel the stalled train along the tracks. So Paul says, first of all, what you need to do is to take care of the sins of the flesh. In chapter 6, he goes on to say, you should take care of the sins of the spirit. And sometimes we emphasize one and we say nothing about the other. What is it in chapter 6? Well, he's talking about some of these people who are going to court. You know, we think we live in a litigious society, and we do, but evidently at Corinth, there were perhaps a number of attorneys there also who majored in disputes. And here brothers are going to court among brothers. People from the same church are going before ungodly judges trying to resolve these disputes. Yes, my friend, this is Pastor Lutzer. And even as I was preaching this message, I was reminded of the fact that the Church of Jesus Christ today is much like the church in Corinth. A church that is shot through with carnality, with factions. I am of Paul, I am of Apollos, they argued. A church that was seeking spiritual gifts, and there was nothing wrong with that except that they would seek particularly those that were most spectacular. A church that still had within itself people who needed church discipline, who were not disciplined. So what the Apostle Paul is saying there in 1 Corinthians is simply this, that when I came to you, before I could begin to clean up the world, you have to clean up the church. And that's my message to you today as I conclude, even as I give this message to myself. At the end of the day, America is in a crisis. We're hearing a lot about politics as we anticipate the coming election. But we are in a great crisis, morally and spiritually. And I think God is saying to us, clean up the church, and then you'll have a greater impact as you attempt to clean up the world.
Some straight talk from Dr. Erwin Lutzer, who's brought part 2 of The Cross, the Basis for Morality, another message in his series, Why the Cross Can Do What Politics Can't. Running to Win comes to you from the Moody Church in Chicago. In sorting out how to mix faith and politics, we all need some clear teaching. This 8-part CD series can be yours as our thank you when you give a gift of any amount to support Running to Win. Just call 1-800-215-5001. That's 1-800-215-5001. Online, go to offerrtw.com. That's offerrtw, all one word, .com. Or write to Running to Win at Box 11174, Chicago, Illinois, 60611. This is Dave McAllister. Tomorrow, more about the cross as the basis for morality. Join us for our next Running to Win.